Hello, good day, and in association with Radio Altsea and Altrincham Community Media, a very warm welcome to the infamous and award-winning podcast that is Life After Work, a podcast that aims to bring you a plethora of concise rhetoric, discussion and opinion on a wide range of topics. With me today are the usual panel of experts, each keen to proffer their thoughts and advice, whether you need it or not. Starting off with Mr. Rod Maxwell, a former business consultant who, after a brain injury, became resident DJ for Radio Altsea and thus found his niche in the world of broadcasting. In fact, the BBC have shown a great deal of interest in Rod of late and have issued a statement saying, if it's the last thing we do, we will make him pay his TV licence.
That's
Good afternoon to you, Rod. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Paul.
Next in line is the very athletic Mr. Phillip Harrison, a former insurance salesman who competes in triathlons, cycling events, and generally makes the rest of us look like a bed of sloths. I won't go to the joke about him smashing 7 marathons in as many days, together with 6 bounty bars, 4 Mars bars, and a family-sized block of Cadbury's Dairy Milk. Good afternoon to you, Phil.
Hi there, Paul. Hi, guys.
Moving on, may I introduce former dentist to the stars and all-round style guru, Mr. Ash Sharma.
Afternoon, chaps. How are you?
Known for his dapper dress sense and impeccable taste in shirts, Ash was recently approached by GQ and is currently in discussion with the well-known fashion magazine. Apparently, he hasn't paid his subscription for months. And then there's me, Paul Davies, former GMP cop and now a writer living on the beautiful island of Skiathos in Greece. Having written 6 novels, I'm patiently waiting for them to become bestsellers, as opposed to their current status of non-sellers. And finally, on the show today, we have with us a very special guest, a good friend of mine and former colleague, Mrs. Hannah Vaughan. Good afternoon to you, Hannah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Hannah is the owner of Signature Funerals, a company that is based in Haslingden and Ramsbottom, and offers funeral services in both traditional and modern themes, and is there to help bereaved clients with the planning and preparation of what is a highly stressful and emotional time. On today's podcast, we are going to be discussing funerals. Is it a taboo subject? Do people shy away from it? Do they go more with the traditional style? Do they put it to the back of the mind because everybody fears death, although death is inevitable? And we've invited Hannah because obviously we need to get a slant and a look on what people are doing nowadays. And obviously you guys, have you thought about it? What's your thoughts on how you would like to be sent off to the maker? So I'll throw it over. Does anyone want to start on funerals? Do we treat it as a little taboo subject, or are in fact we switching on a bit more to the fact that we're all going to die?
I think we might be starting to change our view, but you've got to say, over the years, it's always been a slightly taboo subject, and in some ways, the person who's died leaves it to the family to work out what on earth they ever wanted, and it'll be the same hymns and the same psalms, and it's off you go and down for a couple of pints and a sandwich. But now, thankfully, I actually think people are opening up a little bit about it. I had to think about mine 5.5 years ago before I had my surgery for my brain tumor, and I had to think about my will and I had to think about my funeral, and I think the problem is it brings forward that period of end of life, and nobody wants to speak about that, whether it be a will or it be your funeral. But recently, I've been to a couple, and actually, I think there's totally different ones. There's people who've died at a good age, and that's a celebration, without a doubt, celebration of life. And then there's unfortunately people who die far, far too early, and it's a celebration of life, but they're very, very sad because they've died early. But there's nothing. I think you can still celebrate that life. And I think now people are starting to think totally differently, put aside the Psalms, put aside the whole thing about the God and everything else, and actually get back to the person and talk about the person and their life. And I think that's fundamentally what they're about, remembering the person, not about religion, just remember the person. So I think it's changing anyway. And it's made me think about mine. I haven't written anything down yet, but it certainly made me think about mine.
I think you're right. Sorry, I was going to say, because I think there's a cultural thing here as well. I know in my I'll bring up my culture a lot, don't I, during our podcast with Hindus. We look at, there is a reluctance and a reticence to speak about death. We don't really talk about it. I remember, my grandma, she was very, very old, but no one ever talked about it. She lived with us for a little while. And then there's just always a reluctance. She wasn't very well, and there was just a reluctance of talking about what's going to happen afterwards. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's not meeting up with what's actually going to happen to all of us. It's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, we can't get away from it. It's going to happen. But I think as the generations are moving on, especially with myself and chatting to my cousins and my brother, we are more open now. We're talking about what would we want to do, and as I think it becomes more of a like you just said, Ron, it's more of a celebration now. I think if I wanted to, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I can't think about how I would celebrate my life, but I think it needs to be more of a celebration of your life, doesn't it? Make it a joyous occasion, if you like.
Definitely, it'd be interesting to hear from Hannah. In fact, do you want to go now?
I was just going to say, I think from my experience, both in the police and working as a funeral director, is that notoriously British people are still very stiff upper lip about talking about death. And I've never quite got to the bottom of why that is, but I think a lot of it is probably to do with superstition, in that they think that if they talk about death, they're going to go out and get run over by a bus. I think a lot of it is just generally talking about people's mortality is quite depressing for people. And it's the same reason why people don't want to talk about funerals. They don't want to talk about writing a will. I think the majority of people in the UK still don't have a will. And the reason I think for that is because it's having that conversation about what's going to happen when you die. And people just don't want to have it. And, as a funeral director in the last 4 years, there's a number of things that I've tried to implement to get people to talk about the inevitability of what's going to happen, and people will shy away from it. They don't want that conversation, and it will be, well, when it's happened, it happens. I'll bury my head in the sand until that time comes, and I'm not here anyway, so the people that are left will just have to deal with it. I do think we are moving a little bit away from where we were, say, years and years ago, from the Victorian times when it definitely wasn't spoken about. And like Rod was saying, I think general kind of feeling is people are getting slightly more modern in their thinking about funerals and the inevitability of death, but I do still think we have got a long way to go.
It's interesting because and it would be interesting to hear from you again in terms of what kind of things people do now, but I've got possibly a bit of a strange view on it. I agree with what you said there, but my particular take on it is it's more that I just regard it as a waste of time to be thinking too much about it, because I've alluded to it before on one of these podcasts that my personal belief is I won't be looking down or maybe up on whatever's going on anyway. So I am more than happy for the people who are left, whether that's my children or whoever's organising it, to do as they see fit. I really don't care, and I absolutely mean that. I'm more concerned about my mother, because we found out 3 years ago when my father died, we didn't know what he wanted. We suspect, being his children, he's very irreverent, not one for tradition, similar religious beliefs or lack of them. We suspect he wasn't too bothered either, but we don't know for a fact. And I think that's an important point that we should have just clarified, and why we're seeking to clarify with my mum, we're trying to have that conversation, Hannah, with her, and she's quite reluctant. So we feel that no, tell us what you want, because if you're bothered and you want it to reflect you, we need to know everything from the songs you want, the people, everything really, so that we can do, to coin a phrase, to do her justice really. I'm not bothered for myself, but I'm concerned if we're doing it for somebody else that we do what they want.
And I think that's really, really important.
Can I just throw something in there? I've just thought of something that, Hannah, you say in the Victorian times it was a very taboo subject, wasn't it? And but when you think their mortality rate, they were dead at like 40. Do you think today, because we're living longer, people in, let's say, the 30s or the 40s saying, well, I've got till 80 till I die, so there's no need for me to look into that right now. Do you think people are, I guess, taking for granted the mortality rate? You know, and such is that we get people who unfortunately die at a young age, like Rod went to a guy who was 55, it's no age, but there isn't really any plans set in place. So to me, if you can set your wishes in place now, as morbid as it is, when it gets to your time, you might live for an extra 40, 50 years, but then you're all geared up. I don't know if you've seen a shift in people's attitudes regarding mortality rates going up, or is it just still a bit of a dark taboo subject to talk about?
I think more people are talking about it, and certainly more people are investing in funeral plans for that reason. And I would always kind of suggest that people do that, not necessarily just for a financial reason, but I've seen firsthand how distressed families get when they literally sit in front of me and their loved one's died. And as well as having to cope with the grief and the loss of that person, they're then having to anticipate what they think the person would have wanted. And that causes a real turmoil and a real headache for people, because even down to they don't know whether the person would have wanted to be buried or cremated. And, you know, I do think it's just something that, despite people like me's best effort to bring it to people, you know, into the arena as a topic of conversation, you know, nowadays there's things like death cafes, but they're not very well attended. You know, people, again, with me being a modern funeral director, I'm always trying to kind of almost make it more accessible, more comfortable for people to talk about. However, you know, no matter what I try and do, it's very much an uphill struggle, because people, they have this kind of general, like you say, they'll put it off and put it off and put it off. It's, you know, it's the same when people find, you know, a lump or a bump or whatever, they don't go to the doctors, they'll put it off and put it off and put it off. And it's the same with talking about death. It's a depressing subject for a lot of people, and they'd rather kind of just put it to one side and carry on living their life than they would kind of addressing, you know, what's ultimately going to happen to everybody. And it's a hard one, but we are seeing more and more people now putting financial provision in place and kind of setting some money aside, so that at least the financial burden isn't there for when they, you know, when they die, and it's not as onerous on the family to have to find, you know, £3,000 or £4,000 for a funeral.
I think there's an opportunity to develop an app here, right? And you have an app on your phone, and it has a template, and you can go in and in the privacy of your own home, your own time, you can select different things. It'll ask you different questions down to the tunes you want. You can link it to your iTunes library, for example. You can have the photographs, you can have who's going to read what, and that app gets unlocked by somebody, and that is your plan. But it's you do it in the privacy of your own time. You don't have to go and talk to anybody about it. And then somehow, and this is a bit, I don't know how it works, the app gets accessed, you know, and therefore your plan is there. They even down to, I mean, for me, I want, you know, a tab on a bar somewhere, and a Guinness to be sat on the bar, and that'll be my Guinness, you know, and make sure everybody has a right out time. I would even have a band at my wake, you know, just as something to remember by. But so anyway, Hannah, I'll leave that business idea with you. You develop the first.
You just have £500 of consultancy there. You don't realise it.
Phil Harrison, £500. That's a very cheap rate.
I think the financial aspect is important, and I also think the timing of it is important. As you say, think ahead by all means, but I wonder if it's almost like you will, if you do it. Let's say people move to do it earlier and think well ahead of time. I wonder whether it's the kind of thing you do need to revisit occasionally, and update, because you might actually change your view on what you want. I don't know whether that happens at all.
Yeah, I mean, the going into the app, if I did that on an app and somebody had the power to unlock it, there was no way they would carry out my wishes. we had this conversation over the weekend. Now, the thing is, Han, and I'm coming to see you about this when I eventually get back, because this is how I want my plan. Like I was talking to Rod over the weekend. To me, a funeral shouldn't necessarily be about, oh, I'm going to the gates of heaven. It's all God and our Father and pray. It should be about very spiritual, about celebrating that person's life. Now, to encompass the whole the celebration of life, I want to be buried in a glass coffin in a Saturday Night Fever white suit, propped up like this, and people dancing around me. I genuinely want to go out and be remembered for, wasn't that a cracking funeral? Not, oh, woe is me, like a proper, I want to be there till the very end. So
well, you'll be all right, Paul, as long as you die of Saturday Night Fever, you'll be all right.
Oh God. Oh, triathlon and comedian.
I'm sorry. I'm going now.
But yeah, I do think my funeral, I want it to be very, I do want it to be, what did you say it was? A humanist or something like that?
Atheist. Is it?
I want it, no, it was humanist. It's where you don't actually embrace the religious side of it. You embrace the life of the person. And I want people getting up and giving anecdotes about me and this, that, and the other. I don't want people going, oh, he's such a lovely, because I'm not a lovely guy. Sometimes I'm a prat. And I want people to be telling that to the rest of the congregation. You know, that's my
that's where wakes, I think wakes used to come in. You know, people did the serious thing of the burial. They went to a wake and they had a few jars, and then the stories would come out. And actually, I like the stories that come out right up front, you know, and then have the wake and have a boogie, for God's sake, you know, because the other thing about it is often, and it is contextual to, you know, the situation and the death, of course, but some of them are unfortunately tragic and everything else. But you know, you often find it's the only time when people get together apart from a wedding. And so, you know, people are getting together through, you know, whoever the deceased, and they're remembering the deceased, and they're talking about them, and they're having a bit of crack if it wasn't too traumatic an event, you know. And of course, there are some that no matter, you know, the situation just means they're very sad. They can only be sad, and that's unfortunate. That's just the way it is. But you know, if you get to a point in your life, my dad was, I think, 85, 86. And we had a celebration. You know, it was in a church, but we celebrated his life, and that's the way we wanted it to be. And so I think this humanist thing, really, I don't know where it comes from. I haven't really researched before now, but I just like the idea that it was person centric. It wasn't trying to be God fearing. There wasn't, I think, a prayer. The things that were read were ordinary passages from poems. And I just thought that this is the right thing. It's about the person. It's not trying to sell religion. It's not trying to put any fear into you. It's just celebrating the person. And I think ultimately that's what it should be.
You make a good point there, Rob, because I wish the funerals that I've been to had been like that. But I've not been to many. I think, you know, 4 probably, and they've been, you know, Indian funerals. So they've been very somber, lots of tears, not much celebration. It's just basically, you know, it's almost like passing on, you know, this is the next stage of their afterlife is going on. And then they have readings from texts and that sort of thing. And I remember as a kid looking up and looking at people around, you know, around me. And you can see that, you know, they were actually so fearful. There was no, like you said, what was definitely missing is a celebration aspect to that. And there was none of that. And that's always just attached in my mind, and I'd like that to be different for me. The issue with it, I think, is that we've got a bit of a duality here. If I talk to my children about my funeral, I think I'd be more comfortable. I could do that. I could speak, and you know, I could get my point across and not feel uncomfortable. But I really do not know how that I would speak to my mum about it. I do not know. If I go upstream and chat to my mum, how do I approach it? Am I being disrespectful? am I telling her that I expect it's going to be happening really soon or something like that? You know, and it said, so on one side, if it's mine, I can talk about it. But if I'm talking about my mum to do it, it's a very, very different thing. And I think that's because my mindset is different. She's from the old guard. She's a parent. She probably wouldn't want a celebration. I don't think. I'd love it to be a celebration.
But that could be
good for me as a family. But I don't think I could approach it. I don't know. I mean, if you've got tips of how you'd ever speak to a parent about, you know, that sort of thing, because it's massively taboo in our culture.
I totally get what you're saying there, Ash. But surely something you said in that is your way in, that it's you want to show respect for her and you want to make sure it's what she wants. Is that and you'll gain immediate response, won't you, in terms of whether it's something that she'll prepared to engage in or not.
I think that's also the difference with the kind of the modern day funeral director, in that nowadays, you know, it doesn't have to look or feel a certain way, in that we've done many funerals where we have had to take into consideration different people's within a family. There's different generations where we've had kind of Catholic grandma, we've had Church of England daughter, and the mum who's died might have been a complete atheist, and we've kind of almost done a bit of a combination hybrid service, if you like, where we've respected the grandma. So we might have had a priest that's turned up at the burial, but the wake's been more kind of a celebration, and the kind of the bit in the middle. So we've tried to kind of incorporate everyone's wishes, and there's no reason why a funeral can't be like that. There's absolutely no rules. There's a bit of a myth surrounding funerals that they have to be a certain way, but actually there's no rules. There are no ways to do it, and providing things are legal and practical, you can do just about anything you like. You can dress in any way, you can have any kind of coffin, you can have a funeral, you know, in your back garden if you wanted. There's absolutely no kind of ceiling in terms of the limitations. And certainly when people come through my door, I like to give them choice and basically say, the answer is yes, now give me the question. And we are moving away from kind of traditional packages where you have to have a hearse, you have to have 2 black family cars, you know, but it's always going to be a difficult one where you've got, you know, the older generation where they are very traditional, they might be religious, and it is kind of trying to not offend them, because you need to include them. You don't want to kind of isolate them, and it's really important that you do, if you can, make their wishes known, because otherwise, you know, if they, for example, a Catholic or a Hindu one, if you don't do a certain part of that funeral, then they think that person's going to burn in hell or whatever. So it is really important that even if it's just a little, you know, the priest or whoever might come just the day before and just give a blessing, just to include that little element is really important. So it's kind of ticking every box and pleasing everyone, but there's absolutely no reason in this day and age why you can't kind of do a bit of everything and please everybody.
I want my ashes to go on a road tour, actually. I want a road tour, a pub crawl.
Oh, road tour.
So I want my kids to take.
Isn't there a film about that, actually? There's a film where I can't remember the name of it. Their father dies and they take him on this road trip, and the ashes in a part, and it's quite good. So is that what you want then? Are we invited then?
Well, if I get there before, I get there before you,
bloody hell, Ash, don't write him off just yet.
Well, no, I'm with you, Ash, because we've heard, Paul and Rod, what your funerals are going to be like. I'm desperate to go to both of them now because all the time to get it, and I want to dance to the Bee Gees and watch you in your white suit.
That's exactly.
I was going to say, Ash, you're only a dentist. You weren't a brain surgeon. What was I going to say? No, I quite like the idea of my kids taking on a little bit of a road tour and going back to places that, you know, and remembering me in those places, you know, and so maybe scatter them on Strangford Lough back in Northern Ireland, or take them to a pub and have a pint. I don't know, and on the pitch at Old Trafford if they can get on, but different things like that, you know, and.
There's a lot of different things you can do with ashes now.
You can.
You can have them in a tattoo. You can have them.
Yes.
You can go up and have them in a firework. You can have them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, there's so many different things nowadays that technology can do with ashes, and there's all kinds of weird and wonderful things that a lot of what's really common now is people to have them in jewelry or kind of set in something, an ornament or what have you. But yeah, the kind of the latest thing is to have them in the actual resin in a tattoo, and then you can have that, so the actual ashes are going into your skin.
Wow.
Can I ask you, today, is cremation becoming more popular because we're running out of burial land, or is there some other reason, or is it equally matched, or how is it working?
No, there's definitely, I think 70%, cremation is definitely more popular than burial. It's more of a choice, and I think again partly is down to religion. A lot of people now, the majority of people that come to me certainly are atheists. We're moving away from religion, and there's always that kind of religious element as to why people are getting buried. So a lot of people are wanting to get cremated. What's becoming really popular now, and a big trend, is something called direct cremation. And I don't know if that's something you've heard of, but there's a lot of online providers now that do it. And basically what you do, and you don't even get a service, it's just a process of body disposal. So what the funeral director will do is take your body to the crematorium themselves unaccompanied, and then you'll just get the ashes back. But then, if you're like Rod and you kind of like the idea of more the celebration in the wake, that keeps costs down because you're not having a funeral service, but you've got the ashes. And a lot of people, particularly during COVID, were using that because they weren't able to have funeral services because of the numbers, and they were taking the ashes and having a big kind of, after COVID, a big kind of celebration in the pub, or, doing a road trip or whatever with the ashes. And now we're finding a lot of people are having direct cremations because they're not placing as much value on the actual funeral service or the church service, because, it doesn't have as much meaning as it used to many years ago.
But the ashes are still a useful symbol of the person, are they? Yeah.
So going on Rod's, he wants to go on a road trip. What's the legal sort of slant on things if you were to tow a glass coffin with a BG lookalike in the back of it?
I'd stop you if I was in the police.
As long as you've still got your passport.
Outrageous behaviour.
You won't be playing Staying Alive then, would you?
I want all that. Seriously, I
don't think I've seen anyone in the glass coffin other than Snow White.
Alive and kicking.
And I think, like, from a main theme, as we're walking in, or what was made, I want living in a box. Welcome to see it like that. And if I could, and honestly, I'm not lying. If I could, I would want to be like I say, like this, with the priest or whatever pulling a rope off scene and going like that.
You're giving it a lot of thought.
I have given it a lot of thought. I really have.
I might give mine more thought.
I do know somebody who was buried with a jar of coffee, or at least that's what we were told, because his wife wanted to make sure that he had his morning coffee, and that was just something that she remember him by, And do people do that type of thing, Hannah? Is it typical that people get buried with things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're buried, you can basically have anything inside the coffin. There aren't really kind of too many rules with that. With a cremation, because you're going through the cremator and being burnt, there are certain rules about things that you can't have there. For example, you can't have a bottle of whiskey, for example, because it'll just blow up the cremator, and that would cause significant damage, and I'd be out of business because I'd get a huge fine. But generally speaking, people kind of have a number of things with them in the coffin, whether it be photographs, letters, someone else's ashes with them, the dog's ashes, anything really, any personal effects that mean anything to that person or to the family. Again, they can have, and within reason as well when they're being cremated. But yeah, it's anything that's personal really. had a lady who we did a funeral not long ago. She was cremated in her Jimmy Choo shoes, because that was like really important to her. And yeah, it's just what means something to that person. But yeah, all the time people are buried and cremated with things that go inside the coffin with them.
Do you know what? This is going to sound really stupid, right? But what put me off cremation? Because I remember in Northern Ireland, hardly anybody ever got cremated, until I left there in 1989. And then you come to England, a lot more people do. And on my mind the whole time was, what if somebody hasn't quite checked you and you're still breathing? It's really, I know it's really stupid.
Don't worry, you won't be for long.
No, I know, but it was on my mind, and now, I mean, I've let that one go, and I'm just thinking I'm not going to take up any space.
There's plenty of people that check you before they actually cremate you to make sure that you're dead.
Hannah,
there's a number of
really
doctors that have to legally check you before you go through the.
Been watching too much James Bond, Rod.
Well, in the Victorian ages, they used to have a bell on the top of the when they were buried. They had a bell, didn't it? So if they were buried alive,
Saved by the bell.
Yeah, saved by the bell. Exactly.
Is that where that came from?
Yeah.
We usually learn one thing on these podcasts, don't we? That's what we've learned.
Yeah, saved by the bell. Well, I could put that on my show.
I think the reason that there's not a lot of cremation in Ireland, Rod, is because they're all big Guinness drinkers, and they like burn for a week, man. You know what I mean? You never put them out because they're full of alcohol.
Yeah, I did think about that. Sort of, the residue of whiskey in somebody's bladder or something, and boom, yeah.
A nice tale from my neighbour, who was a 90-odd-year-old lady who died a few years ago, and she actually had a humanist ceremony. It was the first time I'd heard of it, and her sons, she wanted the Morecambe and Wise music played, what is it, Bring Me Sunshine, and at the end of the ceremony, her son did the dance down the aisle doing the Morecambe and Wise thing, and I thought, see, that's the kind of thing you need to think about, isn't it? And
yeah,
a bit of.
I think it's amazing. Let me ask Hannah a question here, because this will be very interesting. What sort of funeral does a funeral director want?
To be honest, my preference probably would be a burial, only because I've actually seen a cremation take place, and I just get a bit frightened that. Not that I don't think I'm dead, I just think they're quite barbaric, I have to say, cremation. But aside from that, I want it to be a celebration. No matter if I go tomorrow or when I'm 101, for me, I've had a good life up to now, and I would want my children to kind of celebrate. I wouldn't want them to be sad, because no one lives forever. And I just think, I would like them to celebrate the happy times and the happy memories. And I think I've seen some amazing funerals. I mean, they're all great, and they're all very personal, and it's about paying tribute to the person and what the family want, and some people, unfortunately, they can't get to a place where it's a celebration. It is a very mournful, somber affair, and that's absolutely fine. That's how they want to remember the person, and that's how they're feeling at that particular time. But some of the most poignant, amazing funerals that I've seen have been the ones that have been a celebration of the person's life. And the humanists will stand there, and they've literally got the whole of the chapel in stitches, because they've told a funny story, or they've really brought everyone to life. And people, it's like a bittersweet. People are kind of crying, laughing through the tears, and it's really lovely to see. And when they all turn up in the bright colours, and I've worn leopard print to funerals, and people have had like VW hearse instead of like the traditional black, and they've had Scatman playing with the songs, and all weird and wonderful things. And it's very much about the tribute to that person and bringing their memories almost back alive. And I think that's really lovely. And for me, I wouldn't personally want it to be a somber affair. I would want it to be just remembering the good times and the happy times, because that's what I think it should look like. Yeah. But I completely accept that for some people they can't get their head around that, and it for religious reasons, cultural reasons, or if it's a particularly young person or whatever, that it's not a celebration, and they're not at that point yet.
Have you ever come across where anybody has recorded a message, Hannah?
I've had someone that I've not recorded a message. No, I have heard of it where they've kind of. Do you mean like to be played at the funeral?
Yes.
I have. So I haven't had he didn't record a message. He recorded a song. So he actually played on his guitar his kind of like his favorite song, and that was played at the funeral. And that I had. Do you know what? Even though I've been doing this job for quite a while now, I've done quite a lot of funerals. There are every now and again funerals that I have tears streaming down my face, because I just, at the end of the day, I'm human, and yes, I'm doing it all the time, but you know, there are certain ones that really get to me, and that was one of them where a granddad, he was there, you know, strumming on his guitar, and it was just so lovely. You know, and his grandkids were there, and they were all kind of like crying, but it was happy. It's a strange one. It's kind of a happy, a bittersweet, I'd say, you know, happy but sad.
I saw a terrific, it was a genuine funeral, and it was some an Irish family, and he had a message that he wanted to this is the sort of thing I'd love. So he had this tape recording put in the coffin with him. So when he was buried and they were all looking out, you heard, hello, open the lid, I'm not dead. Hello, anybody there? And I thought it was genius. And all the relatives that were crying around were suddenly, like you say, Han, in tears of laughter. And it was just so funny. It was really, really well done. Really well done.
Yeah, I might get some of my jingles played, you know, in between songs from the show, Paul.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Can I just ask then? You know, we're all, you know, we seem to be quite comfortable talking about it. Is there anyone who's actually fearful of it? You know, mortality, what happens after they die? Have they given it much thought? Is there any part of you that is actually afraid?
I am. Yeah.
I don't want. I'm not
saying you want to die, but obviously, you know.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of death, but I like you say, I don't want to die, but I don't think I'm afraid of it, because it's one of those things, isn't it? It's going to happen regardless.
The bigger tragedy would be if you've spoilt your life worrying too much about it and being afraid of it. I've been worried and afraid of it all my life, and now I've wasted my life doing that.
Yeah.
You know, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
enjoy exactly while you're here.
Yeah. That's spot on. You need, because you know what? None of us know the day. None of us know that day. So if you live your life to the best of your ability, okay, time out to plan a funeral. Do that. Get out of the way. But live your life in and think, one day I'm going to die. I don't know that day, but until I do, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do the other. And I think we do sometimes get really het up on death and thinking about it too much and letting it get to us. Just on a point, something you did, Han, the other day that I saw on your Instagram, and this I thought was quite an ingenious idea. You know, where it's all undertakers and funeral directors are all in black, and it's a very somber affair. You took away that little bit of somberness, if that's a word, because you wore blue. The blue, and it was all straight away. It was less of a somber affair seeing somebody very smart at the top hat, but it was blue as opposed to black.
Yeah,
and I think you're doing the dead right thing. We need to move away from this black, dark, grey event.
Yeah,
the two are much brighter. Don't say bright as in, oh, let's be joyous somebody's died. I mean, a sort of brighter approach to it, and I thought your new outfit was absolutely spot on.
Thank you. I think what I've tried to do, especially, you know, with the clothes that I wear. I mean, I never come to work dressed in black. I always just come kind of bright and what I would wear if I worked in any kind of office environment. And also my funeral homes, a lot of people come in and they'll say, I was actually quite scared about coming into a funeral home, because they have this reputation for being these very like austere kind of like things like the Addams Family, that, you know, the very depressing, dark places. And the way that I've created my funeral homes is they're like very light, airy, kind of cozy spaces, and people are really surprised. And the reason I've done that is because I want people to come in And it's bad enough them kind of, you know, having to deal with the loss of someone, but if they're then having to come into an environment that feels kind of very awkward, very kind of like, you know, oppressive, then, you know, they're not going to be themselves. And it's really important when they come to me that they feel comfortable and, you know, they leave feeling kind of reassured and not frightened. I'm trying to get away. Yes, death's inevitable, but if we can, like you say, take away that kind of fear of the process in, you know, arranging a funeral and death, then I think we're moving in the right direction. And it is a slow process because people will always have their kind of ideas about death and what have you. There's no getting away from that. It, you know, it's not a nice thing to have to deal with, but if you can kind of make it as comfortable and as kind of pleasant experience for people, then that's got to be a good thing. And, you know, it's again moving away from where we've been years and years ago, where there's this very kind of staid, old-fashioned approach to the way that we dress as funeral directors and the way that our funeral homes are. And, you know, I've tried really hard to kind of push away from that. And when people come, you know, it works. And I get really good feedback because it's a different environment from the one that they think they're going to go into.
Yeah, I think you're doing, having seen your photos and the way you're laying things out, I think it is very bright and it is very refreshingly different. I mean, you know, places like the Co-op, I've been in Co-op funeral homes many times, and they not only look like death, they smell like death.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and they don't seem to want to change their approach. I don't know.
They don't, because I think they don't have to, because whether no matter what they do, they will always get their 500 funerals a year without doing anything, because, you know, people will always go to the Co-op because their families have kind of, you know, they're well established, they have the family client base there, and people, when they think of, you know, when someone dies, oh, who do we think of the funeral director? I know, the Co-op. And people go on autopilot when someone dies. They're not thinking straight, they're vulnerable, and they'll go with the first name that sometimes pops in the head, and quite often that's the Co-op. So therefore, the Co-op are getting business, the likes of the Co-op will get business regardless of what they do. So it doesn't matter if their funeral homes are, you know, as you say, smell of death, feel like death, the funeral directors turn up, you know, scruffy, or the standards are not as high as they should be. It actually doesn't matter, because they'll always get business because of who they are. And that's completely wrong. You know, it shouldn't be that way. But unfortunately, slowly but surely, I think people are moving away from that. But you've still got an era of people where people used to get the dividends from the Co-op, you know, and they're, you know, they used to go there and get the discount and what have you. You've still got an era of people alive that will always go there. And that's what the likes of me and independent funeral directors and new wave funeral directors are up against. Because no matter how much I plough into advertising, no matter how different I am, and no matter how my standards are, you know, high, if I'm competing with the likes of the Co-op, it's hard, because people will always go there regardless of what they are and what they stand for and how good they are. They will get, you know, their 500 funerals a year.
It's a good point, that, and something you said earlier as well, whether it's Co-op or other, let's call them traditional operations, where that idea of the package, which just seems a bit of a, I don't know, I can't find the right word quite, but not the right thing to do. There shouldn't be the idea of a package, should there? That there might be a certain menu of things, but everything should be a set of individual decisions.
Yeah,
but it was financial management, wasn't it? They help people pay, not that they help people pay, but people could contribute to pay for a funeral over time, and it was almost the finance that they were providing as a service with funerals, basically. I reckon Heineken need to do them. So Heineken, you know, what if Heineken did a funeral, or Guinness or something like that? You could have a coffin like a Guinness pint.
You can. That's the thing. In fact, I've done a lot of coffins where you can basically have a vinyl wrap in anything you like. So whether it be your face all over your coffin, or your favorite landscape, or your favorite beer, or whatever, anything you can have wrapped around a coffin nowadays. So if you wanted your Heineken, you can have it.
Do you know? Have you ever thought of the idea of having one that's basically like TV LED screens and it's all different images. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a bit of a waste because it'd be buried, but yeah, okay.
There's the options are tremendous, aren't they? I mean, you can have it. I'm thinking now, glass coffin or rocket ship.
Yeah, if it goes, it depends. Like with cremation, they're slightly stricter as to what they can put through. But if it's buried,
no, I won't. I'm not being burnt. No, forget that. I've caught myself with a cigarette and how painful it is. I'm not having that burning stuff. No, I want to be buried, so people can go to my my graveside weekly, if not more often, lay flowers and say hello to me.
Oh,
if I'm buried,
we put a family bench in the top of the graveyard where my dad is buried, and with a plaque on it, and actually, my mum goes probably 3 times a week to the graveyard, and people will be sitting there, and she sits down and she sits beside them and she has a little chat with them. And that is, you know, and we did it for people just to be able to sit there, ponder, and they might look at the plaque and think, who was this fella? You know, that type of thing. And then, you know, that was the first one that was put in the graveyard. And that for us was actually something that kept a bit of a legacy going, you know, that somebody would remember, you know. So anyway.
I know, what is the cost? What's the sort of range? I know you'd say anything's the limit.
You looking for a quote, Harrison. Looking for a quote.
I'll tell you, and that's what's really important about being transparent with costs. And I think that's really important in this day and age, because people can find out anyway. And particularly the FCA now have introduced regulations whereby funeral directors have to put their standardised price list on their website. That's the kind of the regulations now. But in terms of kind of costings, our funerals start at $995, and that's, like I was saying before, is for a direct cremation, which is the real kind of basic, no service, you know, nothing. You just you go to the crematorium with the funeral director, and then the family get the ashes back. So that's where you start at. But then I've also done funerals that have cost in excess, including the wake, of £50,000. So you kind of got, but the average, I would say, is about £3,500 to £4,000 for a funeral.
Yeah, so I think as a result of this, I'm going to say, here you go, kids. There's £5,000. Go and sort out. Go and see Hannah and sort out my funeral. and they can consult me if they want, but they can do what they want otherwise.
Please, can I be part of that plan?
Well, here, do you know, it's been really interesting, and it does make you think. I'm going to take my app idea, by the way, Hannah. You can have that one for free. But I think the idea of like you're a funeral organizer in an app, and you can do it privately through your life, and then there's some way that it gets released, and there you go. All your wishes are there. You can even record your message and have it up on the screen. You know.
Yeah,
I'm not dead. Let me out.
I'll definitely look into that.
There you go. Well, you heard it first here. You know, I'll only take a small percentage fee for that one. Right. Well, look, really interesting, and you know, it's like everything is going to come to us all at some stage. I'm sort of hoping it's a wee while off, but Hannah,
I hope so too.
Yeah. There you go. Well, look, boys, that's it for another week. Anybody got any ideas for next week?
Reincarnation.
Easter egg.
Easter egg. Yeah, there you go. Right. Well, look, that's it from another episode of Life After Work. This one was on funerals, and maybe it's life after death, really. But there you go. And our thanks to Hannah Vaughan, from Signature Funerals up in Ramsbottom, Haslington direction, up in that direction. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, guys.
Really good chatting to you all. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye now.